Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Welcome back to my Create an RPG series. In this episode we will be building upon our ability system a little bit further, because we are going to be making some room for functionality for the mage class. Now, the combat that we have created so far is not essentially part of the foundation of the RPG series. It's more like an example of how you can build upon what we have to go in a certain direction. If you wanted to have like melee combat and things like that. So the tracing and the collision detection for damage targets and such things. So now we will be creating a little bit of a different system when it comes to mage, because mages tend to be a little bit different when it comes to how their abilities work in comparison to melee. Because melee abilities, you need to keep track of what you're touching and stuff like that, while a mage ability might be something that either it's an ability that activates on an area and then does some damage, or maybe you have a specific target and do damage immediately. So if we look at our ability, if we go to base ability, for a spell, you might want to have something like the normal logic here for attempting to use it, then it goes to the pre-step, and then it uses the ability, which is or is not a montage. So either like without a montage it will go instantly essentially, and then with a montage it will take a while to play, and then you get to the end ability, and this would essentially be where you do something then. So if you have an ability that does damage directly, then you can either have it at the end of the montage, or you can have it as a trigger on the montage, like a notify or something like that, or you could just have it as the part of the end ability to like deal damage to a character. It all depends on how you want to approach creating a system like this. What we will be doing now is we will be doing something where we make spells sort of objects in the world which can travel, and they have in themselves a sort of damage detection system, because we will be generating projectiles and they will travel through the world. So with that said, let's get started. So the way we are going to be approaching this is we are going to be taking an animation, and we will be creating some notifiers on it. So in the part where we determine that an animation has played, let's look at an animation actually so we can reason around it. So we have, let's see here, they're called standing, magic attack, this one for example. So this one here, this one has an ability where it flails around a little bit, and then it comes to a point in the animation which sort of symbolizes some kind of apex point, which would be somewhere here then. So what we could do is have a notify here which says that at this point we're supposed to trigger our ability. So the animation plays, it comes to this point over here, bam, that's when we spawn a projectile of the spell essentially. So to do this we can create a animation notify. So we go to our folder for abilities, because it sort of belongs here, and we should probably put it in our notifies folder. Yeah, let's put it here. Okay, so in here we create a blueprint, and we say we want to have anim notify, I believe it's called. Here we go. Like so, we call it bp underscore ability apex notify. There we go. And this, unlike the state, doesn't have a start and a begin. This one has a notify name and a received notify, because it exists in one point of an animation. And from this point, we essentially want to say we want to say react in some way. to do this, we could implement an interface to our, because what I'm thinking is we're going to be sending some information to our animation blueprint. Since you can in theory have multiple different skeletons for different characters and things like that, and they might not look the same, by having a blueprint interface we can communicate with it regardless of what it is using. So going to our, we can save that first, we go to our interfaces, we create a blueprint interface over here. Call it BPI and call it, let's call it Anim Events. And in this one, let's say we create one called Animation Apex. And we don't really need more information input and output wise for that. Now let's go to our character's animation blueprint and actually implement this interface. So we find the blueprint over here. And class settings and add BPI Anim Events. Compile and save and implement the interface. So what we can do here is we can just add a very simple event dispatcher here now, so that this is agnostic when it comes to who it's being called to, and that in its instance can then create an an event dispatcher which will be handled on each of the separate different characters that are making use of their different animation blueprints. So we'll create an event dispatcher. We can call this one Animation Apex Dispatcher. So we're super clear about what it is. We don't need to send any information about this. Essentially, we can just say call this. So now we've created a sort of chain of logic here, and if we go back to our, not the blueprint interface, but to the notify, we can now say that from our mesh component is the one that has an anim instance, so we can just get anim instance, and we don't need to know what the mesh component is or what the anim instance is. We don't need to cast anything. We'll just call on this one Animation Apex. So we'll just call that blueprint interface like so, and we can just say that we're done here essentially. Now, what will happen is any animation that we add this notify to now, it will send this blueprint interface message to its anim instance, which in turn will call on a event dispatcher. So anybody who's listening to this will know when this happens. And in our case, that might be useful in our abilities then. So if we go back to our ability base class, we can say at some point we want to start listening for this event, but we don't want to do it at all times. First of all, we want to contain the time and duration we want to listen to an event if we're not going to be listening to it forever. And since an event or an ability only lasts for a certain amount of time, we want to only activate it when it's actually prudent, right? So one step is we attempt to use an ability. After that, we have confirmed that we can use an ability, which means that we go to the pre-step. This then becomes a pretty good opportunity for us to actually bind this event. So to do this, we can create a function, so we can have multiples if we want to have that. So we create a function, we call it bind dispatchers. So this way you can bind any number of dispatchers that are of interest for you essentially. In this one we can get the owner, because that's important. And then we need to have the anim instance, because that is where we are going to listen to this event from firing. So we need to get the mesh of this owner so that we can get the anim instance from that mesh. So no casting is being done or anything like that so far. However, now that we have an anim instance, it won't be enough to say that we want to bind this event now. If we say bind, yeah, you can see here we called it Apex or something. So bind Apex doesn't appear here, and this is because this is going to be, of course, an anim instance of the base class anim instance, which doesn't know about the event dispatcher that we defined. So in this case, we want to cast it to this is not 100% awesome, and I am sort of considering doing it in a better way. However, that will make it maybe a little bit too convoluted, and yeah, I think I'll try to keep this simple anyway. Anyway, if we cast this to our third person and in blueprint here, we can say that we are we can now bind Apex here. See, the problem here is if we, this is the point where we have not generality or agnosticity. Never mind. We are not agnostic in this situation here, because now we're requiring a specific anim blueprint in the base ability. A better way to do this, to make it agnostic, would be to have in the character, for example, that the binding to the apex. So in our character, let's open up our character, so third person character. In here we know which anim instance we have, and we can just bind in the event graph essentially. We can bind to that apex event, and then we can have another event dispatcher here, which we can then send. And then as long as all of our other children classes are of this third person character, they can cast this common parent, but we don't have a common parent when it comes to the anim blueprint. But if that is what you want to do, at least now you know how to go about doing that. That should hopefully be good enough, I hope. Anyway, to continue and explain what we're about to do here, we're going to say we want to bind an event here of Apex, meaning that when that event happens, this ability will then be made aware of it. And we can just create an event like this and say compile, save. Why does it? Okay, that's right. We have it as a function. It's going to be a little bit less clear this way, I think. Let's do it this way. I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit sloppy here. Let's just Control X to cut this out. We remove the bind dispatchers function. We create a new event here instead called custom event bind dispatchers. It's essentially the same, but I don't really like the binding inside of functions because I feel it looks a bit messier, and it feels like it is not as easily clear how it's hanging together, because you don't actually see the connection this obviously like you do when you're doing here, right? So that's just a matter of preference from my side. You can do it, of course, in encapsulated in functions if you want. Anyway, here we can say animation apex event or something like that. So now that we have, and compile and save. Now that we have that here, we can essentially go to our usability here, and we can say bind event dispatchers is what we didn't call it apparently. We called it bind dispatchers. Like so. So in the pre-step we will bind the dispatchers, which in this case will get our mesh, which will get our anim instance, which will bind its event dispatcher over there here. So now we have the function available, which means that it is available in all our children now as well. So if we were to go into an ability like multi-slash here and open it up, we could now say apex, and we have a it should be this one, yes. So now we have an event animation apex event which would happen in the base class, but we can like then continue to do code here on it. Considering of course that this ability actually creates that from happening, which means that the animation montage that is connected to the ability has the notify. If we go back here, we can then say that we want to do something similar but in reverse, which is to unbind our events. So let's create some functionality for that, and we'll make a custom event and call it remove dispatchers. And we want to do the same. We want to get owner, get the mesh, get anim instance, and get third person anim blueprint like this, and hook it up just like before. The difference now is that we're going to be saying instead unbind all apex dispatchers, so that we stop listening at this point. And the point we want to stop listening would be when we end the ability, because that's when we're completed or interrupted here essentially in the ability. So if we go to our end ability on the completed down here, we can say was it remove dispatchers? There we go. So then we will, in the end of the ability, remove them again. So we'll just listen during this period essentially, and then we will stop. Yeah, let's see, can we test this? Let's use our slash or something. So our slash, if we go to its anim montage, we can open that up and we can put in this anim notify just to see if it is working essentially. And we can put it over here. We can say add notify and ability apex notify. No, this is just for testing. We will be removing this momentarily. In addition to that, we can go to our ability slash then, and we can say on, just like I showed before. If we type in apex here and choose the event animation apex, we can just print here saying apex of animation was reached. So now in theory, if this is working, which is that this notify happens and then the code happens, that triggers the, let's see here, where is the, there we go. It triggers the animation apex in the anim instance. In the anim instance, it calls the apex dispatcher. The apex dispatcher in its wisdom calls to, it has been bound here by the pre-step. So when we get to so since it's bound here, it will call the animation apex event, which is our overwritten in our slash, which then prints the string. I think I've covered all the parts. So let's try it out and see what happens. So this would be the E key, I think. And you can see that it types out apex of animation was reached. So it's all, the whole chain is at least working, but we will be removing this from our slash now, and we will be removing it from our slash ability because that's not who's supposed to be using it. And we can also go back to our our ability and say, comment around here saying apex of ability is reached, cast spells for example. Like so, and here we will just say bind all dispatchers to listen to during usage of ability. And we will put a comment around this as well saying remove dispatchers ability has ended. Like so. And I think that will do it for this episode. I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.